2012 Ford Focus. It's the first new car I ever bought. It's got some interesting features. This is an SEL model. You can't tell, but it has a foggy headlight. It's been that way ever since I bought it. It's had a couple of interesting things that have gone wrong with it over the years. A horn failed at about 10,000 miles. I had to replace one of the seat belts in the back because I think I got a sucker stuck in it. The air conditioning only works on one side, and I was in a pretty serious accident with it. But other than that, it's a pretty dependable vehicle, certainly for getting to and from campus. Today we are going to hang out with my friend Joe, who teaches in the composition program.
It was good. It was good. How was yours?
How are you? You guys want to go get some coffee?
Let's get some coffee.
All right, let's go. Joe, when did you and I meet each other?
We met in 2013.
All
Had
right.
to be 2013.
And you've been teaching at Wayne State for how long?
I've been teaching at Wayne State since 2013. Yeah.
And what courses do you normally teach?
I teach 1010. I got hired to teach 1010, and I teach the tech writing class 3050. Talk classes like 1020, and I've been around 3010 a lot too.
And what are you teaching this fall?
I'm teaching this fall. I'm teaching 3050 and 1010.
30s, 50s? Oh, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I got a lavender Italian soda. Joe, what'd you get?
I got some regular drip coffee. It's delicious.
How was it?
It was okay. It was good. What'd you get?
I got this lavender iced tea.
Yeah.
It's delicious.
Is it? Yeah. Heard about it.
Go for it.
Hi, Joe.
Hey, Thomas.
So I think what we're supposed to talk about is the differences between 1010, 1020, and 3010.
Okay.
Those courses there at that IC level. So you and I have taught all three of those, and sometimes it's good to kind of step back and say, well, how are all these things connected? It's easy to kind of get a tunnel vision about the whatever course that you're teaching. So in your mind, how do you think about, you could talk about the distinguishing characteristics of each class, or what your sense is of the progression? How do you see that sequence?
Yeah, I mean, I think like 1020 is kind of like the one that I've spent the most time. I mean, I've taught 1010 the most. Spent a lot of time with the curriculum on 1020 and helping develop that. And, I guess we could start there. Like, that's a class that's kind of like getting students used to thinking about terminology like discourse communities that might come up, having conversations about rhetoric, different what they might be talking about in terms of visual rhetoric, or in terms of other kinds of what are some other terms that we use in that class that are
some people
unique
use
to
genre, some people talk about types of writing, the
Yep.
functions of writing.
Yep.
Maybe some of those kinds of
and
things.
it's a research.
Audience,
it's a research-based kind of class, right? So, and that's, I guess, that's similar in many ways to 3010. There's some crossover there with 3010, but 3010 does what now? 3010 starts to look more closely at like
primary research,
discourse communities, and primary research is another kind of like
what kinds of research do different communities do, right?
Yep.
And as someone who teaches 1010, or has taught 1010 in the past, knowing that you're trying to get students to 1020, what kind of things motivate your thinking about 1010 and the way you teach that course?
Well, I think some of it is getting used to a kind of like style of writing in college. That's part of what I'm thinking about when I'm teaching in 1010 and thinking about students going into 1020. I'm thinking about so there's a kind of preparation factor in 1010 that is on my mind, but also I think getting students used to a kind of like writing as methodology, writing as practice, and that's I think common to all the curriculum whenever I teach writing. But I think that gets intensified in 1010, and maybe I'm less focused on it in 1020, and even less so in 3010. My kind of attention to writing as process or different approaches to kind of like practicing writing, so that it's not all done at one moment, or so that there's because research projects lend themselves to that kind of, you need to be able to go at something a couple different times to find wrong information, to take wrong turns and all that kind of stuff when I'm teaching like research-based writing. So in 1020 and 3010, when that stuff gets ratcheted up, in 1010, that stuff isn't taught so much, but it's that kind of like practice and going back. And
getting ready to think that way.
Yeah.
Great.
What are your thoughts on like differences, similarities between the threads that you find in the sequence? Or
I guess something I've been thinking about lately is the kinds of things that we ask students to read in those 3 courses and the differences. And I know people do this differently, and if talk about that. I don't think consensus on this, but for instance, when I teach 1010, it always students coming out of high school maybe don't actually have that much experience with nonfiction prose. And so I usually start in 1010 with newspaper articles, newspaper editorials, short commentary pieces from magazines, and usually start there. And then in 1020, I'll start with maybe some long-form commentary, some long-form argumentative pieces, and then introduce the research article genre. But we spend a lot of time, what are the different features and components of the research article? How do you read a research article? And then, so hopefully by the end of 1020, students are reading a mix of kind of long-form commentary, but also they're hopefully getting pretty good at reading academic research articles and maybe chapters in academic press books. And then 3010, most probably exclusively on academic research articles, and maybe even some things like government reports or that sort of stuff. So in my mind, that's the progression. I know some folks do teach the research article in 1010, and some folks do that successfully. I've not had a lot of luck doing that. As a matter of course, I don't like reading excerpts of things. I like students to be able to read an entire piece and to really digest it. So that's been my approach, but I know that there are folks who teach the research article or research essays in 1010 and do a good job of it, but that's something that I normally choose. That's something I don't normally do in 1010. So that's something I've been thinking a lot about, is, what are we asking students to read in 1010 and throughout the sequence. And I think what makes sense to me is the way that you talk about what are we actually asking students to write and to think about in those 3 courses. What do you think are some of the challenges that face people who teach 1010, 1020, and that 3000 level course, or and how do those what are the contrasts between those 3?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what's similar between them for me is the kind of like commitment to feedback, especially on longer projects. That's always been a challenge for me, and I think
as the papers get longer, that's harder. Turn around in a timely fashion, but still with feedback.
And to be able to kind of like keep a momentum of like re-engaging them with fresh eyes. That's a challenge for me. I think when I get into the 1020, the research intensive classes like 1020 and 3010. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I was going to ask you, when you're grading papers, and let's talk about maybe at 1020 and the 3000 level, how many papers do you grade a day?
Oh,
when
man.
you're really, when you're really up to your neck in it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. My grading is depends. I mean, I tend to read them a couple of times, so the kind of like it's over the course of a couple of days, and I'll get them done. I'll do them in batches where I'll get a class done. I'll get an entire class done. And the thing is that like one of the things that I've tried to do to make that challenge easier for me is to be as invested as I can be in the drafting process, to be giving feedback in class, to be meeting with students.
You already know that project a little bit.
Yeah, and that's like finding and making peace with that as a part of my kind of like grading process has been really helpful to me. It's helped me kind of address the challenge of the kind of labor of feedback is really where I think the challenge is more than grading. The grading sometimes is a little easy for me because if I've spent the time doing the feedback kind of stuff, but that's a challenge. Like that's not easy stuff.
And you've been experimenting with audio feedback too. Right?
Yeah, I do that sometimes. Yep. Especially when I have like group projects and stuff.
So longer projects.
Yep, and that definitely requires me. It makes me become more intimate with a piece of student writing much more quickly when I'm reading to give it audio feedback because I'm seeing it in front of me. I'm talking through the feedback as I'm looking at the project. Yeah.
So I kind of took us up a little track there. So we're talking about the things that you think the challenges for instructors. So grading is getting through that. And so what do you think how do those things track across the 10-10? The papers are shorter, the assignments are shorter, so not as much time.
No, probably not, but I think there's probably a little bit more variation in like the kinds of feedback that I give to students, and that can be a challenge too. That kind of like shifting gears. It could be sometimes there's a class that has particular skills or aptitudes that another class might not have, or there might be parts of a class or some students who struggle in some areas, and then kind of like absorbing that as a reader and trying to identify that quickly and to be okay with focusing on that part of feedback for one student, and then with another student or a couple other students focusing on a kind of different direction of the feedback and be able to kind of like get through that and be, I don't know, to me that's a kind of like cognitively tasking task. That's a really bad way to put it.
No, that's right. I was thinking about that. Do you find that your energy as an instructor is different when you teach at those three, sometimes I find that when I teach 10-10, my physical engagement, it has to be much higher. I feel like I have to be more performative, where if it kind of gets into that 3,000 level, I'm a bit more sitting back and we're talking.
Yeah.
So I notice different energies in those different, when I'm teaching those three different levels. So do you notice that too?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's easy to speak for me. It's easy to speak in generalities like this, and they're usually like not great. But there is often in 10-10, sometimes in classes that I've taught that are either 10-20 or classes like 10-20, kind of more of a high school feel. There's more of an energy there. There's more of a kind of like, but we're going to dive into this research project because we're really passionate about it. Some of that has to do with the way the curriculum's designed, because it's different, I think, in this curriculum when we get to 30-10, or I've taught 30-50 a lot, which is pretty similar to 30-10 in a lot of ways. And I don't know, a lot of times the energy there from the students is more kind of like scholarly and academic. The students are kind of like, they're ready to kind of like jump right into it. They're ready to kind of like, they can speed themselves up if it's a new piece of reading or a new idea or a new concept. They can kind of find their wheels real quick and then be ready to kind of be engaged.
And sometimes at 10-10, it's like a little like, here we go, we're going, right? Here we go.
And there's some frustration with that too. That I think as a teacher, like if I'm reading frustration or if I'm hearing frustration, that a different kind of energy from me might help in kind of either moving past that frustration or leveling it off somehow or redirecting energy so that we can focus on a place where we do feel like we have more agency, we feel like we're more engaged with the material, we have more mastery of it, that kind of stuff.
Do you think it's a problem that I'm wearing sunglasses for this? I'm just thinking about that. I don't want people to think I'm a jerk.
No. I mean, be more expressive with your mouth.
Okay, my face. My face. Do you think there's a through line through the curriculum? You know, you said a minute ago that you feel very familiar with this, even if you haven't taught a course in a few semesters. You kind of have a sense for people who are coming to the curriculum new, or maybe after having been away from it for a few years. What's your sense of like the through line that kind of threads this sequence and our approach to the sequence?
Yeah, I mean, I guess some of that I would locate in terminology that I would feel comfortable using in all three classes. So terms like genre.
Yeah.
So genre and maybe like rhetorical context or concepts, terms like that get us to think about like audience and exigency, reasons why we might write. Those are some of the things that I think I see as a through line that I could locate in each of the courses.
Yeah.
And again, those are mostly around terms and concepts like genre and rhetoric. I think the research aspect, 1010 is not quite so focused on research, although, I mean, we're teaching things like summary and response that are like the prerequisites towards like a research essay. Be able to respond to things and summarize things well. So it's, so I don't know, that kind of stuff feels like there might be a through line as well. How about you? Are there other kinds of like things that thread through those three curricula?
I agree with you that the terminology, and that's helpful to me. If I go, for me, I was thinking about, if 1020 is about secondary research, the 3000 level is about primary research, and in my mind, I think about 1010. I think about 1010 as a course about reading, which is interesting, and I don't know how many people would agree with that. But in my mind, I go reading, secondary research, primary research, and I feel like if we get students through those three courses, being decent readers, decent readers, good researchers, good users of secondary research, and producers, I feel like that's our job a lot of the time. So there's lots of different ways, but I think maybe in my mind that's kind of like the foundation. But I agree with you, that vocabulary that you talked about makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think that kind of like close reading, the kind of critical reading, that goes through all those courses. Yeah.
Black ice.
Black ice?
Yeah, they say it's the most popular of all the air fresheners.
That's amazing. I did not know that.
What does it remind you of?
Let's see. Some kind of flower. Okay, goodbye, Thomas. Bye-bye.